Alexander the Great, King of Macedonia. In his capacity as King of Macedonia and Persia and one of history's greatest military strategists, Alexander the Great built the biggest empire the ancient world had ever known, inspiring such loyalty in his followers that they would follow him anywhere and, if necessary, die in the process. Alexander was by turns seductive and brutal, intelligent and power-hungry, diplomatic and savage. Despite the fact that Alexander the Great passed away before bringing about the unification of a new realm, his impact on Greek and Asian civilization was so great that it gave rise to a new historical era, the Hellenistic period. Origin: King Philip II and Queen Olympias welcomed Alexander III into the world in Pella, Macedonia, in 356 BC. However, according to legend, Zeus, the supreme ruler of the Greek gods, was actually his father. The military might of Philip II was well known. He envisioned conquering the vast Persian Empire while making Macedonia, a region on the northern tip of the Greek peninsula, a force to be reckoned with. Bucephalus. When he tamed the massive stallion with a fiery attitude known as Bucephalus at the age of 12, Alexander displayed great bravery. For the majority of his life, Alexander fought beside the horse. Philip asked the great philosopher Aristotle to instruct his son when Alexander was 13 years old. Alexander's passion in literature, science, medicine, and philosophy was inspired and encouraged by Aristotle. When Philip left to go to war and left his son in charge of Macedonia, Alexander was just 16 years old. During the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BC, Alexander saw an opportunity to demonstrate his military prowess and led a cavalry against the sacred band of Thebes, a purportedly unstoppable, elite force made up solely of male lovers. Alexander demonstrated his grit and bravery, and his cavalry completely destroyed the sacred band of Thebes. Alexander becomes king. Alexander's father Philip was killed by his bodyguard Pausanias in 336 BC. At the age of 20, Alexander ascended to the throne of Macedonia and put an end to his enemies' attempts to overthrow him. Additionally, he put down independence-related uprisings in northern Greece. After cleaning house, Alexander departed to carry on his father's legacy and expand Macedonia's dominance of the world. Alexander sent his troops to Persia and named the general Antipater as regent. At the Granicus River, they encountered Persian and Greek armies after crossing the Hellespont, a constricting strait that separates the Aegean Sea from the Sea of Marmara. Alexander and the Macedonians triumphed. Alexander then moved south and captured Sardes with ease. But in the cities of Miletus, Mylasa, and Halicarnassus, his troops ran against opposition. Halicarnassus, which was under siege but was unconquered, resisted for long enough for King Darius III of Persia, the most recent monarch, to gather a sizable force. Gordian Knot. Alexander traveled north from Halicarnassus to Gordium, the location of the famous Gordian Knot, a collection of intricate knots fastened to an antique cart. According to legend, whomever broke the knot would rule over all of Asia. According to the legend, Alexander attempted the task but was unable to untie the knot by hand. He adopted a different strategy and used his sword to cut through the knot while exulting in victory. Battle of Issus. Near the southern Turkish town of Issus, Alexander and his troops came into conflict with a sizable Persian force commanded by King Darius III in 333 BC. Although Alexander's armies had a significant disadvantage in terms of manpower, they made up for it with determination, expertise, and a vast deal of treasure that had been stolen from Persia. Darius left his wife and children behind when he fled with the remainder of his forces as it became evident that Alexander would win the Battle of Issus. Sysigambis. His mother was so furious that she took Alexander in as a son and disowned Sysigambis. Alexander had by this point shown to be a cunning, and smart military leader. In fact, he had never lost a fight in his whole life. His slogan, "There is nothing impossible to him who will try," would help him create an empire. Battle of Tyre. Alexander then conquered Marathus and Aradus, two Phoenician cities. He seized the towns of Byblos and Sidon despite Darius' request for peace. In response to the Tyrians' denial of his entry, he then laid siege to the heavily defended island of Tyre in January 332 BC. But Tyre was encircled by water, and Alexander had no navy to speak of. To get to Tyre, Alexander gave the order to his men to construct a causeway. Everything went according to plan until they approached the Tyrians' range of fire. Alexander understood he required a powerful navy to get past the Tyrian walls after their forces repeatedly foiled his cunning attempts to enter. In July 332 BC, after assembling a sizable navy, He eventually managed to penetrate the city's defenses. Thousands of Tyrians were put to death for daring to resist him, and many more were sold into slaves. Alexander enters Egypt. Alexander departed for Egypt after turning down another peace proposal from Darius, but he was ignored in Gaza and made to undergo yet another protracted siege. After a few weeks, he captured the town and crossed into Egypt, where he founded Alexandria, the city that still bears his name. Alexander made the trip to the desert to seek the advice of the reputedly wise god Ammon. There are many stories regarding what happened at the oracle, but Alexander was silent about it. Nevertheless, the encounter strengthened the idea that Alexander was a god. Alexander becomes king of Persia. In October 331 BC, Alexander confronted Darius and his enormous army at Gaugamela after taking Egypt. After ferocious combat and significant casualties on both sides, Darius escaped and was killed by his own soldiers. Alexander reportedly found Darius's dead with sadness and gave him a royal burial. Alexander proclaimed himself king of Persia after finally defeating Darius. However, Bessus, another Persian ruler who was rumored to have killed Darius, had also claimed the throne. Alexander was unable to accept the assertion. Following Alexander's continuous pursuit, Bessus's soldiers surrendered to Alexander's close friend Ptolemy, who had Bessus killed and dismembered. After Bessus was defeated, Alexander enjoyed complete dominance over Persia. Proskynesis. Alexander adopted several Persian practices in order to acquire the trust of the Persians. He embraced the Proskynesis ritual of the Persian court, which involves bowing to people according to their rank and kissing their hands. He also started dressing like a Persian. The transformations Alexander underwent in his quest to be revered as a god did not exactly win the Macedonians over. Alexander, who was becoming more and more paranoid, executed one of his most respected generals, Parmenio, in 330 BC. After learning that Parmenio's son Philotas had been found guilty of planning an assassination against Alexander, Alexander kills Cleitus. Cleitus, a fellow general and close friend of Alexander, too perished violently in 328 BC. Cleitus, who had become tired of Alexander's new Persian-like demeanor, kept disparaging him and downplaying his accomplishments while intoxicated. Pushing himself too far, Alexander killed Cleitus with a spear in a fit of rage that tormented him. According to some historians, Alexander killed his general while intoxicated, a condition that plagued him for the majority of his life. Sogdia, a part of the Persian Empire that remained devoted to Bessus, was a difficult territory for Alexander to conquer. The Sogdians fled to the top of a rock and rebuffed Alexander's demand that they submit. Alexander, not one to take no for an answer, instructed some of his soldiers to mount the rock and surprise the Sogdians. One among those on the rock was allegedly a young woman by the name of Roxane. According to the legend, Roxane instantly captured Alexander's heart. Despite her Sogdian ancestry, he married her and she went on his journey with him. Alexander enters India. Alexander invaded Punjab in India in 327 BC. Some tribes submitted amicably, while others did not. Alexander and King Porus of Parava met in 326 BC along the Hydaspes River. Although Porus' army lacked Alexander's level of experience, they did possess a secret weapon: elephants. Nevertheless, Porus was overcome after a bloody struggle in a violent rainstorm. At Hydaspes, Alexander experienced one tragic event: the passing of his cherished horse, Bucephalus. Alexander named the city of Bucephala after him, though it is unknown if he passed away from combat injuries or old age. Alexander was persuaded to go back to Persia by his leaders when his war-weary warriors declined to pursue his plan to try to conquer all of India. Alexander then led his army along the Indus River before being mortally wounded by the Mali. After he recovered, he split his army, sending half to Jadroja, a barren region west of the Indus River, and the other half back to Persia. A mass wedding. Alexander arrived in the Persian city of Susa in the early 324 BC. He gave the order for several of his officers to wed Persian princesses in a large wedding in an effort to unify the Persians and Macedonians and forge a new race that would be exclusively devoted to him. He also got himself 2 additional wives. Alexander's attempt to alter the culture of the Macedonian army angered them, and many of them rebelled. However, Alexander's army retreated after he adopted a hard stance and replaced Macedonian leaders and soldiers with Persians. Alexander gave them back their titles and threw a lavish feast for reconciliation in order to further diffuse the issue. Death of Alexander the Great. Alexander was in charge of a sizable empire by 323 BC. And he had also recovered from the tragic loss of his buddy Hephaestion, who was also rumored to have been one of Alexander's homosexual male lovers. He began making preparations to conquer Arabia because of his ravenous desire for global dominance. But he wouldn't survive to witness it. Alexander the Great passed away in June 323 BC. At the age of 32 after enduring numerous bloody battles. Alexander's death was attributed to malaria or other natural reasons by some historians, while others think he was poisoned. He never designated a successor, either. The empire he had worked so hard to build was torn apart by his death, and the ensuing deadly struggle for power. Why was Alexander the Great great? Alexander introduced Greek culture to many conquered regions, and he created several towns that are still significant cultural hubs today. The term Hellenes, which means to speak Greek or identify with the Greeks, came to refer to the time period between his death and 31 BC, when his empire collapsed. One of the most renowned and effective rulers the ancient world has ever produced was Alexander the Great.